Hello.
Our story begins with alarms blaring through the capital city of the Galactic Republic. People ran through the streets as sirens not heard since the days of the Old Republic rung through city corridors and inside every building, new and old. The Jedi Temple locked itself down thanks to Syndralic, as the Jedi sent a dispatchment to the executive building to protect Supreme Chancellor Valorum. There was no warning from the Federation. The city went to lockdown. This was a hostile attack. The onset of such an event over a planet with a population of well over 3 trillion was the immediate fallout. Casualties piled up because there were more people to panic inside the Ecumenopolis. People flooded into stores to stock up on food supplies. Traffic lanes saw hovercraft crashes. The markets plunged in fear, and small bursts of anarchy raged out in the lower levels. The Trade Federation didn't display any viciousness, aside from parking 90% of their combative fleet over Coruscant's atmosphere. Before the Chancellor or the Jedi could get into any contact with the region security forces, their transmissions were blocked by the Federation. Inside the flagship, Newt Gunray communicated with his board of assistants, Captain Mar Took, General Luck Durd, and Representative Lot Dodd. All of these men played a crucial role in the Federation's success here. After all, despite the Federation making a hostile move for the capital, they were being directed by Darth Sidious. This mission was an effort to put Senator Palpatine into the role of Supreme Chancellor, a vicious attack at the capital to threaten Valorum's rule. But before that could start, Sidious needed to be patient, and the TF had to frighten the people of the Republic. This blockade came from the hostile taxation of trade routes from Valorum's administration. It was perhaps one of the most aggressive moves made by the Senate to tax the major conglomerates in the galaxy in history. The Federation, with Sidious's guidance, was making a move to remove the taxation and make the trade lanes free for commerce. Of course, in the broad scope, it looks more freeing if the trade lanes were just that, but it really wasn't if they were free. The monopolization of hyperspace routes, trade lanes, and various other sources of transport were killing smaller businesses. Valorum's administration was directly challenging the status quo so that the little guy could get a step up. The Senate rallied behind it because of profit, whereas the population rallied behind it for a chance to have more open competition against the major conglomerates. The Federation's bet, as Gunray explained, was that the Republic would back down immediately. This entire blockade had been created to show the government who held true power in the galaxy. Newt clearly had no issue displaying his influence, yet there was one thing he lacked: alliances. Without the backing of the other major monopolies or megacorporations, the TF put itself out into the open as the main target. Even though Gunray positioned his group of Caedonamodians for various strategies to force the Republic to the discussion table, he had a separate collection of political speakers that would try and coerce members of the other major power players in the galaxy to their side. While deliberation and strategy consumed the apparently all-powerful Trade Federation just beyond Coruscant's atmosphere, Sidious contacted his allies. Plagueis and Tyrannus were in two completely different locations across the city, operating on behalf of this plan. Dooku worked inside the Jedi Temple, removing Kamino from the archives and sabotaging their communication array. Plagueis helped with crashing the market by pulling out billions of credits worth of stock. It was a quote-unquote panic move that blindsided many individuals inside the market, i.e., the rich people sold before the everyday traders could. Either you bite the bullet on the dip, or try and sell and save what little you can before the potential crash. It worked perfectly too, because Plagueis pulled his assets out of the market just 3 minutes after the Federation arrived. It was a quote-unquote calculated withdrawal, something no one should question because Hego Damask frequented the Coruscant moon of Hesperidium, so his contacts would have likely informed him about the blockade before anyone else realistically knew. Palpatine, on the other hand, was quickly collaborating with other senators inside the bunkers of the Executive Plaza to discuss Valorum's position in all of this. Clearly, as in very clearly because of his tax code, was this blockade on Valorum's hands. If Finis didn't challenge a conglomerate with greater firepower than the Republic, then this would have never happened. Some of his colleagues believed him, others were outraged. Palpatine's populist policies were a big hit on Naboo, and it made him quite popular inside the capital. But siding with the Federation with this was his first big miss with several of the other senators. The TF openly blockading the capital was far different than a fleet movement outside a mid-rim system like Naboo. No one would really care, but since the capital was the center of commerce, governing, and travel in the galaxy, it completely changed things, especially how other senators viewed it. Palpatine was wise with his wording, so he didn't lose total support from individuals that he spoke to, but his concept of working with the Federation didn't really sit well with everyone. People were content with the businesses holding power inside the government, not them overstepping their boundaries with said government. If the Federation could blockade Coruscant, come out on top, and potentially make more profit from it, then what would stop any other third-party organization from attempting it? They would inevitably make themselves look weaker by trying to negotiate. So while Palpatine's policy ideas for letting the tax code go or simply removing Valorum from power weren't super popular, he didn't become anyone's enemy for thinking it. Sheev still held great respect from his peers, despite his outrageous sentiments. Though it should be said that the one reason many of these people didn't completely turn on him after he suggested forgiving the Federation was that Valorum was nowhere to be seen. It shouldn't come as a surprise, but the Supreme Chancellor had a secret bunker for himself and his cabinet. Valorum had been escorted by Masters Even Peel and Yaddle to that location upon the Federation's arrival. Some senators were just a little upset that they had to sit and hide in dusty old bunkers beneath the Executive Plaza, while Valorum went somewhere else to drink wine and eat calamari. Wait, not the Mon Cala. And sure, yeah, one could presume that, but Finis, despite being born on Coruscant and having an upper-class lifestyle, took this attack quite personally. He wasn't relaxing in a sauna with the other Jedi Masters. That's quite the mental image. He was actually pulling together emergency strategies for facing this. The Jedi Order was his greatest ally here, and he promised them upon entrance to the Chancellor's bunker that he would provide them with whatever they wanted if they helped him out of this. Chancellor Valorum refused to bow down to Newt Gunray or the Federation. This power play was meant to instill fear, and because the TF would never openly attack Coruscant, they had room to play. This, for the Chancellor, was a very dangerous game. Without direct contact to the Jedi Temple because of Dooku, and long-range communications being blocked by the Federation, Valorum had to play hardball. Finis wasn't as fragile as he might have been perceived by many inside the Republic. He was the golden boy for a reason. People loved the opulence he brought to the office. Finis spoke with Peel and Yaddle about sending Jedi Knights to various region security forces in the galaxy and gathering them. The two Jedi didn't very much like the idea of pulling together a military to fight the Federation, but that wasn't his game. Chancellor Valorum had every intention of dissecting Gunray for the galaxy to see in a privately recorded transmission. Finis tapped his thumb heavily against the control console and told the two Jedi that if he could personally bewilder Gunray in an ethical debate, then perhaps he could buy the Jedi enough time to gather these forces. Both Jedi Masters were quite surprised by his quick resolve. But this was rather personal. Coruscant had been his home for his entire life. This was an assault against him personally as a leader, as a person, and as a representative over quadrillions of lives across the greater Republic. He told Even and Yaddle that if they could gather a military for a potential alternative situation, then the Federation wouldn't be ready for it. They tried to dissuade this from happening, not that they wanted to allow the blockade to persist, but they didn't want people dying when this could be resolved in a debate. Valorum knew that. He also knew the Viceroy quite well. Newt was a cowardly man. One time, while the trade route tax was being proposed, Gunray threatened the Chancellor with tariffs. Valorum welcomed him to try and, of course, do it, but it never happened. It would backfire against him anyways, but still. It was one of those conversations where one side had to buckle. Valorum had tricks up his sleeve for exploiting the banking clans, and their horrendous habit of hiking up interest rates to break Gunray. But he never needed to in that scenario. However, Finis had to get into contact with Nick's card of the banking clans ASAP. He could use that strategy here. These were his two directors for Even and Yaddle. Inside the Jedi Temple, total chaos erupted. Dooku used the blockade perfectly to create disruption. Contact between the Jedi inside their own home wasn't even coherent. They couldn't call Yaddle or Even on the other side of the city. No one knew the status of the senators. Every Jedi who took up to the air in Delta 7 starfighters couldn't even report back to the temple. Those who used their starfighters to investigate the city were basically just ensuring that the Federation didn't land troops on the ground. But inside the communication room inside the temple, where technicians tried to get to the bottom of the error, Master Peel arrived. He told the counselors what they needed to do, and what Valorum was hoping to accomplish. Some of them weren't totally on board with it, because it seemed unethical, but they really had no other choice. They selected 24 Jedi to go out and round up every single sector security force and bring them to Hesperidium. From the temple's readout of the Coruscant system, the moon was unguarded, probably because Gunray wanted to maintain favorability with the oligarchs on it. The council also sent diplomats back to Valorum, so that if he needed them, they could be used. This included Kit Fisto, Obi-Wan, Imogundi, Qui-Gon, and Plo Koon. At the same time, Yaddle arrived at the secret bunker and quietly made her way through the people. No one really saw her. They were all too frightened anyways, so they weren't looking out for 2-foot-tall gremlins. The Jedi Master eventually walked through the crowd enough to find Nick's card of the banking clans and inform him of Valorum's request. Being that this was a private conversation, the representative understood the message and left with Master Yaddle. No one heard the discussion, and he took the deal because he would much rather be at the Chancellor's secret bunker than under the Senate Plaza with everyone else. It was safer with Valorum than down here, but Nix also recognized that such an honor would come with a potential deal that would favor the Republic over the banking clans. So he needed to be prepared for anything Valorum might try and throw at him. With all the political shifts coming thanks to the Chancellor's quick thinking, the Viceroy got into contact with his political adversary. Their conversation wasn't very long. It was actually quite short. Newt Gunray told Finis Valorum that he would negotiate a quick and easy surrender if the Republic removed its tax laws against the trade routes in the galaxy that the Federation used. It was clearly interrupting commerce, and Gunray clearly didn't want Valorum's legacy to die with a crashing market. The Chancellor didn't back down, and so he bluffed, giving Newt a chance to give up his invasion or lose his company to the banking clans. To clarify, no deal had been made between Valorum and Nix, so he really was just shooting darts in the air. Newt was infuriated with this transmission and called the Chancellor a liar, a vicious man who only wanted to take. He tried to tell Valorum about all the good the TF did for the galaxy, how their vast wealth provided to the people that the Republic refused to go to, and how the Republic exploited the multi-quadrillion credit company for simply using routes used by everyone else. Valorum couldn't, honestly, believe that they did this whole thing because of a tax code, and he called Gunray a fool. His board of directors should all be fired for doing this. The tax code was a direct response to the Federation's inability to pay anything forward. They had representation inside the Senate. Their leaders should know well enough the struggles inside the galaxy created by the Federation's work. Gunray got flustered and immediately turned off the communication. He told everyone on deck of the flagship that Valorum needed to be dealt with. He had done a great disservice to their company, and that vitriol should be taken personally by everyone inside the room. Maul looked on from the corner with his hood over his head. He was not personally offended. He just mulled around until Newt opened up another panel of strategy with those inside the command center. He was tired of all the bickering with the Republic. Battle droids would be released to the surface of the planet with luck dirt. It was done for. They were going to round up civilians and capture the Coruscant Reserve. Mar Tuk, one of the various captains, stepped in, explaining that it would be wiser to wait this out, would it not? If they went straight up for the kill now, then they'd be opening up a direct attack on the capital, meaning that any number of enemies aligned with the Republic could attack them. It'd be foolish to make that move. Lockdurd, despite agreeing with the move to deploy on the surface, agreed with Mar. Patience would serve them more in this arena. Not that they should open up communications with the Chancellor, but their friends suggested that they do this. He'd be a good contact, call back Sidious. Newt looked to Maul, and then frustratedly started to open a communication to Darth Sidious, still on Coruscant, again. Thanks to the 24 Jedi Knights across the galaxy, using long-range communication frequencies, various fleets were moving towards Hesperidium. The Jedi weren't finished either. They had contacts, given to them by the High Council to reach out to. Because the Republic didn't have an official military, systems relied on regional security forces and local militias. This meant that some planets had individual fleets or fighting forces. Take for example Naboo, that had a Royal Air Force. It was tiny, but those minor numbers added up if they combined with other forces. So like Naboo, dozens of planets and systems around the Republic offered up their support in the means of naval vessels. The irony is, none of these planets realized how the Republic would have treated them had this blockade come to any one of their planets. The response to the capital was overwhelming because people still believed in their government. Valorum wasn't some oligarchic sycophant in their eyes. Rather, he was perceived as a people's leader. Now, there was sympathy for him. He wasn't hated nor adored, and this clearly was his most desperate hour. Despite so many systems offering up their own civilians for the Republic capital, these same planets came to the conclusion that Valorum's response to the challenge presented by the Federation would be the defining moment of his legacy as Supreme Chancellor. Sidious, on the surface of Coruscant, hidden away in a separate compartment of the bunker, called Gunray an idiot. He needed to keep Valorum on call. He could be doing any number of things without their oversight. Keep him over the communication, demand a surrender, or drop troops on the surface. Gunray was still apprehensive, despite his rage about dropping troops into the capital city. It would finalize their blockade as an actual invasion if they did that. That could change the deal-making process. But as Valorum told his Jedi allies, Newt was a coward, a fearful man that hid behind the power of the Federation's arsenal as he was doing right now. He felt safer protecting himself than deploying his troops on the surface. But with Sidious's blessing, he gave Lockdurd and Martuk the command to deploy to the surface. Across the command center, the political diplomats that had been trying to create a deal with the other megacorporations were getting nowhere. The banking clans didn't pick up. The Commerce Guild answered, but they didn't come to an agreement. The Techno Union considered it and offered an incentive for themselves, but the Federation rejected. And all the other smaller businesses weren't widely impressed or were disproportionately phased out in potential deals with the Federation. Chancellor Valorum, thanks to his time provided by Newt Gunray, collected a deal with Nix Card. See, the banking clans, despite being a massive bank, had an arrangement with their representatives. If the representative could secure a deal for the company without company oversight, the clans would agree to it for a grace period of 30 days, meaning that if Nix Card was separated from Scipio like he was now, he could effectively make a deal without needing full support from the board of directors. Finis and Nix came to the conclusion that because the Federation owed tons of subsidies to the banking clans for construction materials on Molinist and Scipio, they would jack up the interest rates 50% every quarter. The clans had been forgiving because credits were lucrative, and they always came back around anyways. But with this deal made with Valorum, they would essentially split the Federation in two. Finis created a beneficial system that would see military assets, trade lanes, and tech going in the Republic hands to become nationalized, while a majority of the supplies, trading partners, and actual business would go to the banking clans, meaning that the Republic would come out with an actual military, and the clans would become the most dominant conglomerate in the galaxy. It was a simple move that really would effectively change everything in the Republic. Nix, because this would incentivize a stronger relationship with the government and the clans, told Valorum that any debt owed by the Republic would be forgiven. Thinis also created a wave of all new tax codes for multi-trillionaire and up companies for 5 years. Basically, every other multi-trillionaire company would be taxed except for the banking clans. It would give them time to restructure their assets however they deemed necessary before facing the new codes, whatever they may be. Now, Valorum in the back of his head knew that this wouldn't affect him or his legacy. There was a scenario where he could take emergency powers for himself. That wasn't really on the table for him. But if he was in office, he could create a tax code that could deeply hurt the overpowered banking clans if all went successfully. Something for the government to earn back its credits lost in the acquisition and more. Regardless, all this was agreed upon and signed with 5 Jedi witnesses before Nute Gunray could contact him again, because he was mulling around. Just before the transmission went to the surface, so Gunray could announce his invasion with pride, a consular cruiser with the 5 Jedi departed for the flagship. Valorum told Nix that he assumed Gunray would protect the vessel and see it as an official surrender, which is exactly what he would do. As the political tension sent butterflies into the stomach of the Supreme Chancellor, the Jedi had their own problem. It did not come externally. About 200 Jedi Delta 7 starfighters were prepared for action if their names were called. Yet the biggest surprise inside the temple was the betrayal of the Jedi from one of their own. Not just any member of the Order, but the Grand Master's final Padawan. Because the temple went on lockdown, Dooku got stuck inside the generator room, where he had shut down the communication array. He was able to duck and avoid the technicians who came back there, but the Jedi discovered him when one of the Masters went back to clean up some space. He tried to create a defense, but a quick check through the security that Dooku couldn't reconfigure because he was stuck back there proved that he was guilty. It did relieve the Jedi. Communication within the temple opened back up, and it helped them establish a wired comlink to the Chancellor's bunker. This was due to previous invasions some 1,000+ years ago, but the Jedi established wired connections to major locations across the city. It was meant to avoid communication blocks from outer space. With Dooku put away in prison below the temple, the High Council established a firm connection with the Chancellor to best assist him. With battle droids protected by Mar Tuk's cruiser making its way down to the surface, Gunray told Valorum that it was over. The droids would not attack unless provoked. This was his final chance to offer up a surrender and save the capital from a prolonged economic crash. Chancellor Valorum explained that he had dispatched emissaries to the flagship to deliver a treaty, one that had been co-written by the banking clans. On the record, it looked like Gunray had the Republic right where he wanted it, but that all would very quickly change. Just as the Jedi landed, Palpatine and the senators inside the bunker started moving away from them to another discreet location selected by the Senate Commando unit. They saw the arriving droid forces and believed it'd be safer to be away, especially due to the bunkers being well known to the public. Lat Dad immediately reported this change to Mar Tuk. Following behind Master Plo on the flagship were the aforementioned 4 Jedi, Ima Gundy, Kit Fisto, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon. They, with robes over their heads, entered one of the main corridors before igniting their lightsabers and making a breach towards the bridge. The door sealed on them, and Gunray called Valorum a fool. Even though there was an attack unit heading towards the capital city, it didn't mean the flagship was undefended. Battle droids from various corridors were activated and sent towards the Jedi position, as Plo and Ima Gundy plugged their lightsabers into the door and started to cut it open. Destroyers from various hallways rolled towards them, leaving Kenobi, Fisto, and Jin to defend their brothers. Gunray on the other side of the door called for the all-out attack on the capital city. Mar Tuk and Luk Durd took these orders personally and prepared their own variations of an attack. The battle droids that deployed from MTT tanks went all out with firing at buildings, transport still moving, and people unlucky enough to still be out. Mar Tuk targeted the financial district, per Gunray's orders, to crash the economy. The cannons on the battleship ripped through buildings, one of which Plagueis was in. He moved to avoid the attacking cruiser, but eventually, he'd be claimed by one of the buildings collapsing onto another. He may have been powerful and wise, but he couldn't stop entire structures from crushing him, especially not skyscrapers. Palpatine didn't know why they were breaking protocol like this because they had gone too far. but he didn't have time to contact Gunray. Battle droids were descending on his position, so naturally, he used his senator peers as cover to escape imminent death, without using his powers. Valorum, despite the chaos, remained steadfast. With the panicking Nyx card behind him, he stayed the course, presenting a strong demeanor and even harsher resolve. He promised Gunray that if he continued this assault, he would face the wrath of capital punishment. But Newt had already panicked and pulled the trigger. The cowardly man couldn't back out anymore. He'd gone too far. He had put himself and his company into this position. But no, it was actually the Jedi who started this. Speaking of the Jedi, they were almost through the additional security doors. As the two opposition leaders challenged each other verbally, and the capital faced an all-out attack, the Jedi broke through the door, only to be attacked themselves. Maul Saber ripped down on them. Plo Koon took the brunt of the strike, as Ima-Gun Di wiped through the battle droids on the command deck. Behind them, Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Kit Fisto slipped into the entrance, but the droids were still overwhelming them. Kit Fisto was clipped by a shot, and Obi-Wan behind him the same, forcing the elder Qui-Gon to take the brunt of the attack. Plo and Maul continued to trade blows in the command center as Ima-Gun Di rushed for the control console and flipped it, to shut down the vast array of droids inside the flagship. All the B-1s slumped over, and the Jedi Master pointed his weapon at Gunray's throat. He nodded to the Chancellor, who told Newt to call off the assault. It was over. They had lost. Even though the Federation was technically done for, the Jedi all rallied around Plo, who continued to face off against Maul in a lightsaber duel. Obi-Wan swung in, only to be thrown the opposite direction, with a similar fate hitting Kit Fisto. Both masters, Qui-Gon and Plo, challenged the Zabrak with a slower, more methodical approach, and despite all the raw talent possessed by the Sith assassin, the space was small and confined. He couldn't utilize his skills. The entrance may have been torn through by the lightsabers, but it wouldn't be easy for Maul to escape. Most of the B-1 battle droids were offline around that entrance. Maul had to back away, cutting and slicing at the surprised Jedi. Thanks to the B-1 engagement, the Jedi were all warmed up. Kit Fisto rejoined the fight with Kenobi right behind him. All their sabers surrounded Maul, lightly cutting through his skin and causing him to resort to more darkness. It eventually led to his defeat. Plo managed to overpower Maul, forcing him to the ground. Qui-Gon at this ran to the other side of the room to assist Ima with the shutdown command. There were two variants, one for the flagship and one for the bulk army. It was the one major flaw with the Federation, but they never had to adapt for a widespread campaign or worry about Jedi infiltrators. None of their enemies ever got on board their ships. Thanks to Master Jin though, the attacking droid armies across the planetary surface would be shut down, and from the Jedi Temple, 200 Delta 7 starfighters would launch. Without access to his Vulture droids, Mar Tuck's Lucrehawk was without protection, aside from the heavy cannons. The Jedi attack came with starfighters gliding past the Lucrehawk, firing into the hull and blasting down at it. The forces gathered were given the go-ahead, thanks to the wired connection to Valorum's bunker. The assault came with lots of failure, as Mar Tuck continued to force his ship through entire buildings and from the financial district into the executive one. It wouldn't be the destruction of his vessel that came, but the rogue Jedi ship that slammed down into a dozen senators that wiped Palpatine out. That wouldn't kill him. Being ripped in half would. Mar Tuck's ship would survive the assault, because he surrendered, but the damage to the city over the course of the attack would be atrocious. Thanks to the Jedi, the security forces gathered around the Republic would not be used in battle. Instead, they would provide a dense layer for the Republic, as the Jedi and militias rounded up every single one of the Trade Federation goons that tried to overtake the government. Valorum would emerge from the bunker as a hero, but because of the casualties to the Senate, he would be forced, despite his choice, to undertake the responsibilities of the emergency powers. The first government session following the invasion wouldn't really be a session, but a trial for war crimes against the Republic. Almost everything Valorum promised the banking clans would also come true following it. The Federation fleet would become a part of the Republic's arsenal, and deals promised were made a reality in following Senate sessions. Without the Sith intermingling inside the reforming Republic, Valorum used his emergency powers to create a small military, one of only 3 million volunteers. They would take command over the Federation fleet and station it outside of Coruscant as rebuilding started on the capital. New senators were handpicked by local governments or elected, and the Republic started to focus on the response made by systems under its protection. Everyone flocked to Coruscant to save it and her people, so it really was the government's responsibility to repay such a favor to those who had been neglected for years by their leadership. Valorum's trade deal with the banking clans really was superficial. While in the early days after the blockade of Coruscant, it looked like the perfect rule set to capitalize off of, it quickly became clear that after the 5-year grace period, the banking clan business would come under the same type of scrutiny the other conglomerates were facing now. And despite Finis wanting to return control back to the Senate, he legally could not, because the threat of the other major corporations remained in the eyes of all the people. This wasn't just an all-out war on the mega corporations that owned almost all commerce in the galaxy, but a total rejection of the oligarchic structure that benefited only a small class of people. The Jedi participated in what they could, but for them, their first and immediate concern was the captured Maul and the treacherous Dooku. Secrets of the Sith would be revealed, but in the end, neither Tyrannus nor Maul would see freedom again. The Jedi would try and convert them, but they simply refused to change, especially Dooku. In the end, the Jedi were heroes of the Galactic Republic for standing side by side with the now stoic and infallible Supreme Chancellor. Valorum was a Jedi supporter, as he promised he would be, and because they had proven themselves as true allies in a conflict against what was a far superior force, he rewarded them. The trials for the attackers like Gunray, Tuck, Durd, and Lot Dod resulted in the execution of an entire business board, and the arrests of several other conspirators. The Jedi were rewarded as heroes, as Valorum spent the next 5 years of the banking clan grace period dismantling every other major conglomerate. After the grace period, the clans would go next. Valorum's influence over the Republic reset it completely, and the Sith motivation, the one that believed attacking Coruscant would throttle Palpatine into power, ended up being the greatest strike to the heart of corruption, inevitably beginning a new golden age in galactic policy making. And that, my friends, is a pretty C-SPAN-y story. Special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash the like button. Let's talk about the C-SPAN story. I wanted to go with a really different style for this one, and so I'm curious if it worked. I wanted this one to jump around a lot, and I don't usually do this with stories, but I wanted this story to take place in one day. Like, that was really what I wanted going into this. I didn't want to have like we gotta go somewhere else, because this is all on the capital, you know? This is like the home of the Republic, 3 trillion people, 10,000 Jedi, this is it. This is like ground zero. And I really thought it would be fun to do a quick jumpy video where it's the concept of the story is, you know, you go from one character to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and it's really fast paced, which is a bit different because a lot of these C-SPAN stories, as I call them, are always, you know, they're always like in the Senate, you got this big policy meeting, they're debating, you have to rally to make a new coalition or committee or commission or whatnot, and this one really is like, I really wanted the pressure to be felt. And that's why it's so jumpy. It's really meant to, like, I'm really trying to put you guys into Valorum's shoes. That's really what it is, and that rapid, like, all right, next thing. I really wanted that to be almost anxious, almost anxiety-inducing. Not that I want you guys to get anxiety from this, but you know, I wanted to be like, this is like only like, okay, we gotta get to this, we gotta get to that, like. It's one thing after another, and obviously I cover some parts from the Sith perspective, but I really wanted most of this to be from Valorum's side, because, you know, I think it'd be fun to make him, and most of the stories where he is the unsung hero, it is quite fun. He's just an interesting character, rest in peace to the actor, but it's always fun to have him as this, like, unsung hero, and that's what he is in this story. Despite the Jedi defeating Maul and the Jedi capturing Dooku and Sidious and Palpatine getting murked from death from above, you know, despite all of that, Valorum is the hero of the story, And he's the hero because he calls out the bluff of Gunray. And because he's forced to operate, and that's really the big difference I wanted to communicate here, is that the big difference is what would happen if the Federation blockaded Coruscant over Naboo. Everything changes because people care about Coruscant. People don't care about Naboo. And that's not meant to be hateful or spiteful. That's just how it is. It's clear in the movies. And in the movies, they would be, that victim complex of the Republic would be really evident. And I really like the contrast of everyone around the Republic sending their forces to the capital, even though it isn't used. It's really, I'm going for like the imagery of it, the meaning of it. Like, they care about Coruscant, this golden child of the Republic, but like Naboo, good luck. That's not my problem. But if it's Coruscant, everyone needs to go. Everyone needs to go and try and protect this savior in the galaxy. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. Fun little C-SPAN story, a little more intense for this style story, but I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.